I feel that my NDE is a positive gift that I'm supposed to give out to the world. When I was in my NDE, that's what I was told was my purpose.
Yeah.
So I was up on the ceiling above my body. That's what I found was I was told that I was supposed to talk about this. And so it took me a long time. It took me 12 years. And I didn't have anybody else that had ever had an NDE around me. So I didn't know. I didn't even know it was called an NDE. So it took some time, and I saw how the other side, whatever you call beyond the curtain, planted things to happen in my life that energized me in my capacity to talk about it, because I was scared at first, and I didn't want to have anybody think I was weird, and I had children, and I didn't want to talk about it. When I was 31 and I had moved to Santa Barbara, the person that had asked me to move down here from Oregon asked me to marry him if I came down to Santa Barbara, and he had a home here, and he had been working up in Oregon on a temporary position up there. And so I had been married previously, and I had a little son who was about 4 or 5 years old at that time. And I thought that this was going to be a great idea, that, wow, Santa Barbara, California, and this is going to be amazing. So the person was nice to me and everything was good. So I moved down here and I married him. And about 3 months after the marriage, I started to see the real him. And he was very controlling, and he was very manipulative. He would control and manipulate me. And I was way far away from my family, of course, and I knew nobody down here other than him. And he isolated me, and he hurt me a lot. So he would punch me, kick me, push me up against the wall, hold his hand up to my throat and make me not be able to breathe sometimes. Everything that he could do that hurt me whenever I did anything, like as simple as I'm not supposed to put my coffee cup, I don't drink coffee, but I'm just making it up, on the table without having something underneath it. Well, if I forgot and I did something that he had told me not to do, then he would hit me or push me or shove me or kick me. And, it was really traumatic. And I was very scared of him. And I ended up leaving him for a year and telling him I had already asked him to go to a marriage family counselor. And he, after three or four sessions, rejected that idea and wouldn't go anymore. I took him to a church that I knew a pastor at, and he tried to help, and he rejected that too. The husband rejected that too. And then I wrote him a 9-page letter and said, if you ever hit me again, I'm going to leave you. I'm not gonna live my life being hurt like this. And he, would always apologize after he did the blow up, but he would do it again 3 months, 3 weeks later, who knows, whenever it triggered for him. So I moved out from him, and I lived in an apartment for a year with my son. And he was about 7 years old at that time. And then I told the husband that if he got counseling and he solved his problem with his abuse situation, that I would consider moving back in. Well, he again lied to me, lured me back in, told me everything was going to be wonderful. We were going to have a lovely life together. And shortly after I moved back in, it was right back to the same behaviors. So he ended up rupturing a disc in my back, my lower back, my L5-S1. And I had to go, I couldn't walk anymore. And the first doctor that saw me told me I would never walk again. I was 31 years old. And I had just had a baby with him. And we had a little baby daughter. So I had this little cute little redheaded 1-month-old baby daughter, and he ruptured my back. So the second doctor that I went and saw told me that he could fix it. And the first doctor had said, you're never going to walk again. So I scheduled surgery with that doctor, and he was a neurosurgeon, and he got an orthopedic surgeon on board to do the surgery with him. And they were going to do a laminectomy, discectomy. And that was fixing the area that had blown out, ruptured, and getting all the fragments of the disc out of my body. And then they wanted to check to see if the fragments had chipped my spinal cord when they blew out, because I wasn't walking. And that would have been a bigger surgery, and they would have needed to fix my spinal cord too. So the night before the surgery, they had me come into the hospital, and they did what's called a myelogram. And that's injecting iodine dye into my spinal cord right at the back of my neck and numbing it first, but I was completely alert and awake. There was no other things going on with me. And they numbed the area, and they injected the dye into my spinal cord, and they had me on an x-ray table, and they told me, you have to hold completely still during this whole procedure. Otherwise, you could have headaches, severe headaches, for months afterwards. So I laid on the table. The two neurosurgeon and an orthopedic surgeon were in the room. They were against a wall over behind the two x-ray techs that were right by the table. And there was a nurse in the room over at another desk by the door of the room. And she was doing paperwork. And they had injected the dye in, and they told me to hold still. And the x-ray tech next to the table pushed a button on the table to supposedly raise my head and lower my feet. Unfortunately, he was pushing the wrong button on the table, but he immediately, not paying attention to what he was doing or the table, started talking to the other x-ray tech that was at the head of the table with a monitor, computer monitor in front of him, and he was going to be watching the dye as it went down my spine, because the x-ray table was up above me and would be getting that information over to the monitor that he was seeing. So the two of them were talking to each other about fun stuff, not anything medical. And I started feeling immediately when he started pushing the table, and it was kind of going, the table was, and it was going really slowly. And I started feeling funny. And I thought, oh, wow, am I supposed to be feeling like this? I kind of feel like I'm going to faint. And because they were talking and I couldn't see the two doctors and the nurse was clear across the room, I didn't say anything. I just laid there. And I thought, oh, I feel so bad. I feel weird. I don't know what, I'm going to faint or something. Something's wrong. And by the time I realized I need to interrupt them and I need them to focus on me, I couldn't talk. I couldn't actually open my mouth and speak anything. And I couldn't reach my hand out to get their attention. So it was about a minute after they had started moving the table. And in the next 30 seconds, my eyes started rolling to the back of my head, so I couldn't keep my vision forward. They were rolling backwards. And then the last thing I did was start hyperventilating. I was going like that. And that's what made them stop talking to each other. And then they turned and looked at me, and the x-ray tech with his finger on the button leaned over my body and my face, and then he leaned back to see where his thumb was on the machine, and right then he made this face like, and that was the last thing I saw. My eyes shut in my body, and the next second I was up on the ceiling above my body, looking down at my body in the whole room. It felt like there was a ceiling against like the back of my head, but of course I didn't have a head or a body up there. It felt like it hit a barrier, and I was looking straight down. I could hear and see everything, and I was very calm up there. I wasn't feeling panicked like I had been in my body, and I looked down and calmly said, if I'm up here and my body's down there and they're calling code blue, because the x-ray tech had started calling code blue, which means dead, the person is dead, the heart has stopped, then I think that I'm dead. And so right when I said that, there was a feeling of a presence right to the left of my body, and it felt really loving and accepting. I felt like I had been wrapped into a warm blanket of love and acceptance, and it just felt amazing. And I immediately started saying to the being in my train of thought, I really need to go back into my life. If I leave my children in this way at this time, they'll be abused and they won't grow up to be the good human beings that they're capable of being. I need to go back to protect them. Please let me go back, please. So the being didn't speak to me right then, and everything was going on down below. They'd called in for an oxygen cart to come in, so the 2 x-ray techs had been doing CPR on me. One of them was doing chest compressions on my chest. The other one was blowing into my mouth oxygen. And then when the oxygen cart came in, then they put the oxygen mask on my face, and then they both switched off every 2 minutes or so doing chest compressions, because one person would get tired of doing it, then the other person would come in and he would do it for 2 minutes. I was watching it all from above, calm as could be. And the this other person came into the room, and the doctors were yelling out orders to everybody, and put it on this shelf that was on the wall, this ledge, and he started peeling off these white things and putting them onto my chest. I had never seen a heart monitor. I did not know what it was. And up on the ceiling, I had said maybe 2 or 3 times by then how much I wanted to go back into my life. And then I said to the being, I understand everything everyone else is doing in the room to resuscitate me, but I don't understand what that box is. What is that? And I was moved down in front of the box so that it was right in front of my vision of my consciousness. And there was a green glass window at the top of it and a lot of dials and switches and stuff. And there was a toggle switch on the side of it. And I watched as the man who had brought it in had finished putting the circles on me. And his hand went in front of my face like this. And he used the little toggle switch to turn the box on. And there was a little white light in the long green screen, and it started moving across the screen in a straight line. I didn't know what it was. And it was making this monotone sound going beep. Well, after it hit the end of the long box, it started again, and it started going across the screen again. And then I still didn't know what it was. And the third time it started to go across, about a third of the way over, I don't know how I got the information, but I realized, oh, it's supposed to be going up and down. That's my heart. It's not beating. And the second I thought that, I was moved back up on the ceiling again next to the being. And I again said, I really want to go back into my life. Please, I need to help my children. So right about that time, the neurosurgeon said to the orthopedic surgeon, too much time has passed. She's going to be brain dead. We need to do something. And the orthopedic surgeon said, stand clear. And everybody backed away from the table. And he stepped 2 steps forwards, took his fist from behind his back and pounded it right in my center of my chest. I watched my body respond to that. I was up above still, and I watched it kind of jerk because he'd hit me so hard, but I didn't go back into it. And up on the ceiling, right when that happened, the being finally spoke to me. And this beautiful voice said, but if you go back, you'll still be in your marriage. What will you do? And then showed me these film clips that just went flash, 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 flash. All these little films of all the damage that my husband had been doing, the hitting, kidding, pushing, shoving, kicking, all the things were shown. I'd been trying to forgive him, get him to change, forget the things that he'd done and try to forgive him, but they wanted me, that being wanted me to remember that. So he showed me all those experiences and then gave me the time to think about what my answer would be. So I thought about all the things that I had done to try to help him change, my husband change. Nothing had ever worked. And I came to the realization that it wasn't him that could change. I needed to change. So I said to the being, if you let me go back, I promise you, I'll get strong enough to leave him. And the second that I said that, that same orthopedic surgeon did another strike to my chest, and my eyes shut up above, and I opened my eyes, and I had the oxygen mask on my face. I was back in my body. And he was only, arm's length away from me. So I looked at him and I said into the oxygen mask, "What just happened?" And the nurse leaned over me and said, "Stop, don't talk. We need to stabilize you." And so for 20 minutes, they did whatever they had to do to stabilize me. And then they took the oxygen mask off. And I said, "What just happened?" I was up on the ceiling and I could see and hear everything. And the neurosurgeon, he went, "Oh, brother." And then that made me completely recount what had just happened because I wanted to be believed. I just had an experience I'd never heard of. And so I said, she was on the phone over there calling for the defib unit and saying stat a lot. And that lady came in with the oxygen card. But before that, these two guys were doing chest compressions and blowing in my mouth. And then, he said to you, too much time had passed and I was going to be brain dead. And you hit me twice on the chest. And then I came back. Well, that freaked the neurosurgeon out massively. And he clenched his hands up next to his body and had this face like this. And he went, "I'm not going to stand here and listen to this." And he stormed out of the room. But then the orthopedic surgeon took my hand and said, "Tell me, what did it feel like? Tell me again what you saw. How did you feel when you were feeling this? What was it like?" And he was very interested in everybody else in the room, stood there and listened to the whole thing. Then they put me on a gurney and they sent me up to my room because I was having surgery the next morning, and no one at the hospital would talk to me and answer any question about it because, of course, it had been a medical error and they were afraid of lawsuit. So the next morning I got shipped down to the surgical area and they did the laminectomy, discectomy on my back. And when I was in the recovery area, the two doctors were walking towards me. And I said, "What happened last night during my myelogram? What happened?" And the neurosurgeon put his hand out like this and said, "I am not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about your surgery." So when my then husband came later that afternoon to the hospital and I told him what happened, he said, "Oh, that couldn't have happened. You probably hallucinated that." Well, I knew I had never done drugs, never had alcohol, never did things, never had any hallucinations. I was solid. I was straight. There wasn't any hallucination there, and I knew it. So I just took that story that had happened to me and I put it inside myself and I cherished it, but I never told anybody about it for like 12 years. I ended up getting away from the husband. I ended up safely getting away from the husband, which was big deal for me. And my two children lived with me. We had an apartment. And one of the things that the near-death experience does is it gives you this connection to the other side. So I ended up finding this sweet apartment. I had gone to 4 different apartment managers and they had declined because I didn't have any money, because my husband had taken my whole entire salary every month and I had no money. So I had to ask an apartment manager to wait, until I could pay him when I got my salary directly from my employer, because he was going to keep all my money. And so I needed to have somebody who would believe me. And finally, the 5th person that I saw the day that I was looking for an apartment just was the kindest person. And actually, you're going to love this. He had grown up in the Netherlands. He was about 60 years old. He told me that during World War II, he was a child. And he said that his parents had Jewish people knock on their door many, many times running from Germany. And they had they needed a coat, or they needed a blanket, or they needed a place to sleep overnight, or they needed food. And he said, my parents every single time helped everyone that knocked on my door, on our door. And he said, today, when you told me about what your situation was, I see the same face that those Jewish people had of you running in fear from something. She said, you can move into the apartment. Yes, you can move in. And he trusted me. I became friends with him. He was the nicest man. And my husband that I ended up marrying lived only a block away, and my child and his child became friends, and they got us together on a date with the two children. And I ended up getting married 2 years after the divorce and after the near-death experience. And I married the nicest guy. And guess what? He'd been in the Netherlands for 5 years playing basketball in Leiden and Zandvoort. The Netherlands is a very special place to me and to my husband and to my family. So I want to tell you, I love you guys. So it ended up that, I came out of my shell because of a nurse at the hospital. She was a friend of mine, and her mom was dying, and I realized that my near-death experience story might help her in her impending grief over her mom's death. And so I told her what happened, and she was the first person other than my husband that I'm married to. I told him, and he believed me completely. So I knew I'd gotten the right guy, but I told this nurse, and she said, Barbara, that's called a near-death experience. There's a lot of information online. We nurses see that happen all the time. She said, it's real. Check it out. So I ended up finding out information about it, and I ended up going to a big conference that the IANDS organization, which IANDS stands in, it's an international organization. They have groups, I think, in Amsterdam, but you can look online on their website, and it's International Association for Near-Death Studies. So it's IANDS.org is their website. And they have part of their website shows where their groups are all over the world. And they also have online groups that you can become a part of, that you don't even have to live near a physical group like mine. You can do an online group and be still connected with people who have had near-death experiences, as well as those people who want to learn more about them. So it's an amazing organization. But I feel that, all of the planting of the things that happened in my life to get me to where I am right now is just beautiful. And I feel that the door is open to the other side, and I feel happy that I understand what I do. And there's been so many times that my husband is just shocked at what happens when things unfold, and he, can't believe what just happened. One of those is an experience where we were driving back from San Francisco to Santa Barbara, and it's about a 5.5-hour drive. And it was about 9:30 at night. We were about a half an hour north of Santa Barbara, and it's along the coastline, and it's very windy. It's called Gaviota. And we came along that area, and the wind was blowing really hard, and we were in our van, our Toyota van, and the gusts of wind were kind of, rocking the van, and it was pretty big. And all of a sudden, this big, big gust of wind hit the van, and I watched as my husband was struggling to keep the van under control, holding onto the steering wheel, and his hands were just shaking. He was just, with all of his might, trying to keep the car under control. And so after it kind of stopped, and the wind was just gusting again, not the big gust of wind, I said, I don't think we should do 65 miles an hour. I think we should do 50. Let's slow down. And he said, yeah, I think so too. So he slowed down to 50, and I thought we were safe. I felt okay then. We were doing slower speed. We're on a freeway. Interestingly, about 5 minutes later, this voice in my ear whispers, danger. Big impact ahead. danger, big impact. And I just went, oh my God. And so I turned to my husband and I said, you know how I sometimes hear from the other side? And he said, yes. And I said, I just heard this. And I repeated what the voice had said. And I said, so I think we should slow down again. Instead of doing 50, I think we should do 30 miles an hour, because we're going to need to be able to have stopping time so we don't hit whatever it is. I don't know if it's a tree that's blown over or if it's a car that's gone out of control, but something up there is a danger for us to hit. So we need to slow down more. Let's do 30 miles an hour. And he goes, Barbara, we're on the freeway. We can't do 30. The speed limit's 65. We can't do 30. And so then I looked through the back of our van and I looked in front of us and I looked at him and I said, Victor, there's no one behind us, no car lights, nobody in front of us. No one is going to care if we're doing 30 miles an hour. If you see somebody catching up to us and you feel like you need to speed up a little bit until they pass us, go ahead. But we need stopping time. So do 30 as long as we can. So he goes, okay, I guess I can do that. So he slowed down to 30 miles an hour. For about 10 minutes, we were traveling at 30 miles an hour and no cars. This is a very frequented highway coming into Santa Barbara, and everybody from the north uses this highway. It's usually, lots of people. So it was weird that nobody was there. What we didn't know was that the California Highway Patrol, the police, had closed the freeway behind us, and we were in between the closure and what was way up ahead, the reason why they closed it. So we're traveling along and we go around a corner, and way up in the distance in the dark, I see a single police car's lights. That was the only one I saw in this whole situation. And I knew right then that that was where the danger was. So I was intently looking, trying to see through the dark, like, what is the danger? What is the danger? And as we came up behind the police car in the slow lane, there's only a fast lane and a slow lane next to each other. And we were coming up in the slow lane. The one thing that we saw was that the police car hadn't parked off of the freeway and, was keeping both lanes open. He had stopped his car in the slow lane and he was blocking it. So we were going to have to change lanes to the fast lane to go around him. So about 50 yards, about a football field, half of a football field, behind the police car, Victor started to change lanes. When he did, someone from the other side, this was the most freaky moment, grabbed both of my upper arms. I felt clenching hands on my upper arms. I saw the shimmer of a face in front of my face, right up close to it. And I heard 10 miles an hour screamed really loud. So I was freaked out, and I echoed what the 10 miles an hour. I echoed it and said it to Victor. And I screamed, 10 miles an hour really loud. So he had just changed lanes into the fast lane, and the cop car was up ahead. And he slowed down between where we were right then and the cop car. So he was doing 10 miles an hour right when he went by the cop car. Still, we didn't know what the situation was. But we got about maybe 5 car lengths past the cop car, and our lights finally lit up the bottom, dirty bottom of a semi-truck that had turned over on its side, and the bottom was all dirty with no reflectors, and the cab of the truck where the truck driver would be and where the gas tanks were was right in front of us, and we were going to end up hitting it if we stayed in the lane. And the rest of the truck was blocking the slow lane and off the side of the highway, so there was nothing to do but go to the left of the front of the truck and go off the highway and go around the front of the truck. And because we were doing 10 miles an hour, we were able to do that. And when I got on the far side of the truck, I looked up, and there was the police officer standing up on top of the truck, braced against the wind, talking to the trapped truck driver who was inside. And he was shocked to see a car, because he knew that the police had closed the freeway and didn't think any cars were going to come. So my husband didn't know that I saw him. continued driving and went onto the freeway again and started going down towards Santa Barbara, just going along. And I was saying thank you to the other side and saying, thank you for the police officer's life. Thank you for the truck driver's life. If we would have hit that truck and exploded those gas tanks, we would have died and they would have died. And I'm so grateful to be here and be able to do the things that you asked me to do and help people and do kind things for everyone that I can find. Then that's what I do, and that's why I'm here. And when you're ready to take me home, which is, I don't think there's a heaven and a hell. I believe we come from home to grow our souls here on earth and to learn lessons, and then we go back home again. And I believe we're here many, many times, that we are planted here with lessons to learn in the same soul group. And one time you might be the mother, and the next time you might be the daughter, and the next time you might be the boss, and whoever it happens to be that you interact with. I think that we're here many times with those people. And so I was saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. And finally, about 10 minutes after we'd passed the truck, Victor finally said, he'd been completely quiet and silent. And he said, Barbara, how is it that you do that? How, if I'd not watched that whole thing unfold, he said, I would have never believed this story. How are you able to do that? And I said to him, Victor, it's not me. I have my door open. I have my heart open for the other side, and they know that I'll listen to them because I understand that they're real, but many people don't. And when you don't have your heart open and you don't understand that your intuition is actually the other side helping you to grasp something that's beyond you, then you don't have your door open. You can't learn from the situations, and you're not going to be as protected as you are if you do have that connection. So I said, it's them that helped us get through that whole situation. They didn't want the police officer to die. They didn't want the truck driver. They didn't want us to die. They made a change to that situation for us. And so he really, listens and appreciates and believes in this because he's watched it occur, and he's watched it right in front of him, and I've got lots of other stories that happened in my life. And the other side of the information that I have is that when I was 55 years old, I ended up going to one of the IANDS conferences, and there was a speaker. Her name is P.M.H. Atwater, and she's a researcher for near-death experiences. She's written a number of books. Check her out. And she was a speaker, and she was talking about the after effects that near-death experiencers have, and I was in the audience. So the one thing that was weird was, as she was talking about them, I was realizing that the after effects that she was talking about had been happening all the way back to my early childhood. So it wasn't just after my near-death experience at age 31. How could that be? Why would I have those after effects all the way back? So after I talked to her after her speech, she told me, you need to talk with your family because something may have happened to you back when you were a child that they didn't talk to you about, and you need to talk with your family. Well, my parents were deceased by then. I was 55, but I had an older brother who was 65 at the time, and I was going up to Oregon to see him and have dinner with him, and so I had to figure out a way, since I'd never told my family about my near-death experience that happened at age 31, I needed to figure out a way to ask him about something happening to me when I was a child, but not telling him about my near-death experience. So I said to him that I was doing a life review of my medical things that had happened to me and putting them in a little journal book in my purse so that if I ever got into a car accident or was at the hospital and they needed to know what my vaccinations had been or what my surgeries had been, that it would be right there in my purse. So my brother said that he would think about, when I asked him, was there anything when I was young that happened to me that I should know about? He said, I'll think about that. So after we had dinner together and enjoyed his wife and his daughter and my husband and I, and we were all having fun, and we were outside the restaurant, and my husband was standing next to me, and my brother put his hand on my arm and said, Barbie, there is something I do need to talk to you about. He said, I always felt that I should talk to you, but, mom and dad said never to tell you what happened, never to talk to you about it. But he said, when you were 18 months old, you had a very high fever. He said, I don't remember what you had, whether it was measles or some other disease. He said, you were very, very sick. And he said, you went into convulsions at our home in Salem. And he said, you stopped breathing. So my dad was on the phone, got advice from the fire department to put me into the bathtub, have my mom put me into the bathtub in just neutral water, and then slowly add ice cubes to slowly lower my body temperature. Otherwise, I would go into shock. So my mom had me in the bathtub. She sent my brothers over to the neighbors' houses to get more ice because she only had like one tray back in 1958. And so my brother came back, my oldest brother came back first, and he handed the bag of ice to my mom, and he was standing in the doorway of the bathroom, and my mom was sobbing over the top of me and crying really hard. And my brother was watching the whole thing. And he said that my mom started adding the ice to the water and was crying. And he said, all of a sudden, I came back to life. And he said, what you did was you were completely, asleep, like, completely dead like this. And he said, you turned purple. So he said he knew that something was drastically wrong, no circulation of your blood. And he said, you went like that. And he said, you threw your head back and you took in a deep breath, and then you started crying and you turned from purple to red. And he said, then he knew that, that was much better because your circulation was happening again. So the ambulance people came in and took me off to the hospital, and I was in the hospital like 4 days. And my parents told my 3 siblings never to talk to me about it. So I ended up talking to my older sister about it, and she remembered the incident too. So it's not just my brother, it's my sister. And I probably had a near-death experience then. And I used to be a child that would, like, my parents didn't go to church or anything. They weren't religious. I would lay in bed at night and talk to God before I went to sleep. And my mom would come in and go, who are you talking to? And I'd say, I'm talking to God. And she'd go, she didn't know what to think about that. Many times the phone would ring and I would say, Mom, it's Grandma. She's calling about blah, blah, blah. And I would tell her what Grandma was calling about. She'd walk over to the phone, like looking at me, and then she'd pick up the phone and it would be Grandma, and she would be calling about the thing. But I'd said, I knew what was going to happen before it happened many, many times. And it freaked her out. She used to kind of say to me, where did you come from? Who are you? Where did you come from? So it was really kind of, I learned to hide it. I learned to disguise it. And when I got the messages, I usually kept quiet about it. And there were a couple times that I did open up, once in high school where I freaked everybody out because I knew what was going to happen. And, it was hard. I didn't know why. I was different. I didn't know. And I also had a very, very strong love for people. And my friends and my sister, my younger sister and my oldest, they'd be out, doing things with their friends. And I would walk down the street to the elderly couple's house. There were 3 of them in our neighborhood. And I would pick a flower and I would go down and sit with them and listen to the stories about their lives. I'd be 9 years old or 6 years old or 12 years old and be listening to their stories and be friends with them. Because it didn't matter to me about competition and being a sports person or, having friends and riding your bike around the neighborhood and throwing rocks at other kids. And those were all the things that they